Hey guys, welcome to Ben Wrenchin. My name is Ben, and today I'm wrenching on this 2011 Mazda CX-7. I just finished changing the belt on it, so I've still got the tire off, and today I'm going to be doing brakes all around on this car. I'm hoping not to run into any issues because I've still got one more project I need to do on this car before I give it back. But hopefully I can burn through this today and get it done. I'm ready, so let's get after it. So I've already got the car jacked up on a jack stand with my jack as a safety net. I throw the tire under the car as an emergency backup, and I've got the rear wheels chalked and the parking brake engaged. I got out all the tools I think I'll need for this, but if you've been watching the channel, you know that I'll probably end up using 10 times as many tools. I also got some new brake parts from Callahan, which if you know anything about them, their sales team is the best.
You can get a good look at your butcher.
So with the tire off, I can go ahead and start taking off this caliper. It's got two 17mm bolts on it. I'll get that off and then I'll show you how to get these rotor screws out. Those can be a pain at times, but I've got some tricks to get those off. I'll change out the pads and rotors and then rinse and repeat for all four. First thing to do when you're doing brakes is to make sure you've got the proper PPE. So I've got safety glasses and I'm gonna glove up so I don't get brake dust on my hands. I'll start with these two 17mm bolts on the caliper. And one thing I can do that's gonna help me out is to turn this wheel this way so I have better access to these. Sometimes these can be seized up pretty good, but with the wheel turned out like this, I can use my long breaker bar, and that makes it a lot easier. So I'll get the bottom loose too, and with both of those loose, I can take them out the rest of the way with a ratchet. I'll leave the top in there and start by taking the bottom all the way out first. And I can feel some resistance on this boot, so that tells me that these definitely needed greased up at least. So I'll make sure to grease these when I put them back in. And I'm not sure why, but it's really binding up in that boot, but I got it to come out all the way. I'll really need to clean this one up once I get it out. Oh, all right, and after some persuasion, I got it out the rest of the way. It basically has no grease on it, so that was the problem. And same thing for the top one. And that one came out a lot easier. These are different lengths, so I'll need to remember which is the bottom and which is the top. And it's never a bad idea to replace your caliper slide pins whenever you're doing a brake job. If the caliper's stuck on there like this, you can use a pry bar in here to jam it open. I like to use the longest pry bar I can get in here. And then I just line it up with one of the cooling vanes. And I'll pry it open as much as I can. Can also try to get a smaller one in there and see if it'll go inside one of those cooling vanes. And then that helps me get a little bit more leverage to pry this open even more. And you can see rust and debris just falling right off of this. So this caliper's pretty rusty, but that's okay, we can clean it up. And there we go, look at all that. There's a lot of debris in here. So I use a caliper hanger to hang it up on the spring. And that way it's out of the way. You just want to make sure you don't put any kinks or put too much pressure on this brake line. And the first thing I can see with these pads is that this inside pad is just completely gone. There's the backing plate, and luckily the pad slid out without too much effort. But as you can see, there is basically nothing left on this pad. So it was definitely time for brakes on this car. Now that's a good sign of what's to come because these came out really easy. They're both in pretty rough shape and it was definitely time for new brakes. This rotor is technically thick enough, but all this rust on the outside tells me that we need new rotors anyway. I generally don't just replace pads when I'm doing brakes. I like to do rotors too, just because you got all new parts. But technically these rotors are thick enough. I tried to look up the minimum thickness requirements for rotors on this car, and I read 26mm. These exceed that, so these are okay. However, like I said, all the rust here and the rings that I can feel on the inside of the rotor, all that tells me that buying new rotors was definitely the way to go. I generally do that anyway though. So now I can get this caliper bracket off. It's also got two bolts on the backside, and these look to be 19mm. So I'll get a 19mm socket on here. I'll use my longest breaker bar again, and I can loosen both of those up. And with those loosened up, I can get them off the rest of the way with the battery ratchet. Thread this bolt back in just a little bit to give me some leverage for this one. And this one's pretty tight. So I'll switch to a ratchet for this one. It feels like it might be cross-threaded, so I'm going to tighten it back up just a little bit. And that loosened it up a little bit. So I'll take it out the old-fashioned way. And I'll definitely need to do a good cleaning on all these bolts before I put them back in. And there we go, I got the bottom out too. So I'll set both of those bolts aside, and then I can go ahead and take the caliper bracket off. So I'll go ahead and straighten the wheel back up, And with the wheel straightened back out, I can start to get this rotor off. The first thing I see is two things that I don't like, and that is these rotor hold down screws. These can be rusted in here pretty good and very difficult to get out. This one doesn't look too bad, but this one looks like it is not going to be any fun. So the first thing I'll do is clean them up with a wire brush, and hopefully that'll loosen up some of that rust. This one really doesn't even need it. Next, I'll hit them with a hammer just to loosen them up a little bit. And look at all that rust falling out. You just want to be careful not to hit the lug studs. And now I'll hit them with some PB Blaster. I'll let that soak in for a little bit, and then I'll use the tool that I've got that helps out with these a lot. This is an impact driver set. I'll link this in the description as well. I use this pretty exclusively for these rotor screws like this. I grab the biggest bit in there and see if it'll sit inside that screw. That is the correct one. So from there I can chuck that bit onto the driver. And the nice thing about this is it turns as you hit it. So you hammer it in, put a little bit of turning force on it, and hit it as hard as you can. And I can already see this one turning, which is good news because this was the worst one. And I have yet to find a rotor screw that this didn't work on. So if you've ever fought with rotor screws and don't want to deal with that headache, just get one of these impact drivers, because these save you a lot of headache. So there's the worst one. So I'll do the same thing for the other one. All right, and there we go. I got both of them out in no time at all. Highly recommend an impact driver if you ever do brakes. So now I know that this rotor is probably seized on pretty good. There's a couple of things I can do to get it off. First thing I'll try is to spray PB Blaster in these holes. That'll seep down into the backside of the rotor. I can also spray some in here on the backside. So after giving that some time to creep in, I can hit the face of this rotor with a hammer. And since I'm not reusing these, I can hit them as hard as I want. I just want to make sure I don't hit these studs. You can even hit it out here. And there's just rust flying everywhere. Just hit it in all the corners. And that loosened it up pretty good because I can wiggle it off now. And there we go, the rotor's off. That is all the material that came out of this rotor and was binding it up in there. So I'll really need to give this hub a good cleaning before I put the new rotors on. So I'll get all this cleaned up and then we'll unbox the new parts. Couple of things to talk about now that I got everything cleaned up. I'm going to compress the pistons on this caliper with this caliper piston tool. I'll use the thicker of the two pads and put it up against the caliper pistons. I'll link this in the description. There are different types. This is just the one that I have. There's another one with a handle that ratchets this way that I would kind of prefer. I'll probably get one of those at some point. But I can use this to push back these pistons, and that'll give me more room for the new brake pads when I get those in. Before I push those back all the way, I want to take the cap off the brake fluid reservoir. This will allow for the fluid to have some place to go rather than just bottling up in this system. So I'll leave that cap off for now while I do that, and then I'll double check the level and make sure it's not too high. And I'll probably just have to do a little bit on each side at a time. I'm not really sure if that matters, but I'm going to do it anyway. And at this point, it would be really nice to have one of those ratcheting ones. So I'm probably going to order those, and I'll just link that one in the description since that's what you'll need for these calipers. So I'll get these pushed all the way back, and that'll give me enough room for my new pads and rotors. The next thing I want to talk about are these slide pins, or actually just the boots on the slide pins. So this one, I think it's for the top. This was just a normal boot, nothing to see here. For the bottom one, this is something that I've never seen. I've got a full boot that does not have an opening on the other side. So this is actually what was getting caught up inside the caliper and I think caused some failure. It's possible that I did it taking it out because I was twisting on it pretty good. But this section's all warped right here, so I'm not going to be able to reuse this one. I did make a quick trip to AutoZone to get some new ones. There's the part number, but I will link some Amazon equivalents in the description. These are the same as the ones I took off, except these aren't warped. So I am going to go ahead and replace the slide pin boots. I cleaned all the hardware up with a wire wheel and some brake cleaner. So these cleaned up pretty nice, so I'll be able to reuse all this. And I used a small brush on my drill that I really like to be able to get into some of those holes. I will link some of these in the description too, because these are super helpful. But with all that, I've got everything ready to install new parts, so I'm gonna go ahead and open those up. So I will say I did not get these Callahan brake pads for any reason other than they were the cheapest that I could get the quickest on Amazon. The first thing that I don't like is that the front brake pads came opened. At least all the pads are there, but I don't like that the packaging was opened. Second, the wear indicators are not attached to the pads, so I don't know if these fell off in shipping or what happened, but I don't know where these are supposed to go, so I may just leave them off. They did send all the hardware, which is nice. I know the ones that came off the front were these small clip styles, so these other ones probably go for the rear. But another thing that I didn't like is that there are two different part numbers, one for the front rotors and one for the back. It does not indicate which is which, so this is the front. Aside from that though, these look pretty good. So I'll take this out and clean it up. You always want to make sure to clean off this surface because it comes with oil so that these don't rust during shipping. So I'll just use a clean rag and some brake cleaner and clean these up real quick. And not a lot of oil, but this is a microfiber cloth, so it doesn't show as much as it normally would if I used a regular cloth. I like using these so they don't leave fibers all over the metal. But with everything cleaned up, I'm ready to start installing parts. So I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize on the front of the hub here to make sure that the new rotor doesn't stick for the next guy that works on this. And after putting entirely too much anti-seize on here, I think I'm ready to put the rotor on. So I want to make sure to line these holes for the rotor screws up with the two holes in the hub. So it's going to go on just like that. And then I'll use a lug nut to secure the rotor down until I get everything else installed. Wipe it off one last time. I'll turn the wheel again so I can get everything else installed easier. I normally don't like these rotor screws, but I am going to put these in just to hold the rotor up against the face of the hub because these lug nuts are too short. You can leave these off because this is really the only purpose that they serve. But now I can take this lug nut back off because it's not doing anything. So before I install the caliper bracket, I am going to go ahead and put this long boot in here. It'll just be easier to install it with it free like this. I'll put a little bit of brake parts lube in here just to make it easier. And I think putting the slide pin in the boot before I install it is going to make it easier to install. And I can't get this boot up any further and there's still a little bit of space here, so that's actually not going to help very much. But luckily a 1/4-inch socket extension fits in there pretty well, so I'm going to use that to get this in. So I can use this to install it, just pushing it through and making sure that it goes in evenly and smoothly until I've got it sticking out the other side. And that actually worked pretty well. So just keep in mind you want the open side of the boot on the back of the caliper. So the caliper goes like this and the closed side of the boot is facing out and the open side is facing to the back where the bolt's going to go in. And I can go ahead and install the other boot while I'm at it, that way I don't forget it. And that one's simple enough to install. And before I put the bracket on, I want to put some anti-seize on my bolts. And again, this will just help the next person so these aren't seized up. So I'll go ahead and set my bolts in here. That way I don't get anti-seize all over my hands. And I still did anyway. I cannot use anti-seize without getting it all over me. And then I can line up the bracket, just making sure that the long boot is on the bottom. Line up the bolt holes, and I'll get both bolts started by hand. And this will go a lot quicker with my battery ratchet. And these get torqued to about 85 foot-pounds. Next, I'll put some brake parts lubricant on all of the spots where anything's going to slide on the caliper bracket. I'll also put a little bit under the mounting hardware. So basically I'm just putting 4 dots in here, and then I'll use a Q-tip to spread that out, and also make sure to put a little bit on this top part here. You don't want to go crazy with this stuff, and it's actually okay if you don't use it. There are a lot of people that say that this causes problems, and a lot of people that say that you'll have problems if you don't use this. So it's really just kind of a matter of who you want to listen to. I've always put it on and never had problems, so I'm just going to keep doing that. But over the years I've started using less and less. So next I can go ahead and slide these mounting tabs on. So these do have 2 sides. There's one flat side and then one side with some tabs on it. And then there's a curved side that's going to go on the back here. So I want to put the tabs on the outside with the curved side back. So I'll get this one in here. And this one here, so these tabs are on the outside. Once I get it down in that groove, I can pull it out and it's got a tab on this part here. I just want to make sure all that doesn't rub up against the rotor. So nothing's making contact with the rotor, so that looks good. So I'll do the same with the top. I'll just make sure that these slide in and they sit flush, and all those feel pretty good. So before I install the back pad, I do want to show that this wear indicator does actually install onto the top ear of the pad. It leaves just a little bit of metal sticking out so that when this gets down to that size, it's going to screech, and then you'll know to change your brake pads. So I'll go ahead and install those, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of brake parts lubricant on the top ear, and then I'll do the same on the bottom. And then I'll spread that around this ear in this top section here. I'll try to make sure I don't get any on the pad surface, and I can clean off any extra. I just like to use a little bit, that way if this actually does cause contaminants to stick in here, then it's only just a little bit. But it still provides some lubrication so these don't seize up. So I think that's pretty good. I'll go ahead and install this. I want to make sure that the curved part is to the back. Slide the ear into one of the mounting brackets. I'll start with the top ear since it's got the wear indicator on it. So once I get both of them close, I can just push back on them because these are kind of spring loaded. Slide one ear in, and once I've got both ears lined up, I can slide the pad in. And if you have to fight with these for very long like I am, that is usually a good indicator that you did not get the best brake parts. There we go. So now that one's in, and so now I'll do the same with the front pad. Spread this out a little bit, make sure that the curved side is in, and this one should be easier because I don't have that wear indicator. All right, and there we go, both of them are in. So now I'll clean up the extra lubricant to make sure it doesn't catch any debris. Do the same on this side, make sure the backing plates are clean. The caliper bolts get torqued down to 65 foot-pounds. I'll make sure my line's not twisted and slide the caliper over the brake pads. I want to make sure to push back these boots so that I don't crush those. So the larger bolt goes on top, so I'll put just a little bit of lubricant on it. I'll make sure I get it all the way around. I don't like putting too much because I've gotten this seized up in here before with too much lubricant. But then I'll just slowly slide it in and make sure that boot still looks good. Slide it in and out a few times to spread out that lubricant. So I'll pull it back out just to make sure the lubricant spread out well. Boot still looks good, so I can get this started by hand. And then I'll do the same with the bottom bolt. Just a little bit of lubricant. Put a little too much to start with, so I'll spread this out across the bolt. That looks pretty good. I'll make sure this gets seated in the boot well. I can lift up the caliper and put this slide pin in just to spread out some of that lubricant. I'll turn it as I do, that way I spread it out a little bit better. I'll push the boot back, slide the caliper back down, and then I can get the pin installed. I'll turn it as I do to make sure to spread out that lubricant a little bit more. And that one feels good too, so I'll go ahead and tighten it down by hand. These both feel pretty loose, so that's good. It doesn't feel like it's bound up or anything. And these get torqued down to 65 foot-pounds. And with everything installed, I like to make sure that the caliper floats a little bit. That tells you that nothing is seized up in there. You should be able to push down and then let go and see it bounce back. That free movement is a really good thing. So I like seeing that. And I did put the cap back on the brake fluid reservoir after I compressed the piston just to make sure no moisture gets in there. But you can see that after I compressed the piston, the fluid level went up quite a bit. It's actually almost at the max, and we're going to do all the other brakes, so I will need to get some of that brake fluid out, but I can kill two birds with one stone. To take some brake fluid out and get out some of the old brake fluid, I can do it at the bleeder screw here. I just took this little rubber nipple off. This one is at 8mm, so I'm going to use my tiny 8mm wrench. I'll start by brushing it off just to make sure it's easier to take off. Put just a little PB blaster on it, slide my wrench on, and then I'll use this one-man bleeder bottle to catch the brake fluid. But that way I can gravity bleed a little bit of the brake fluid out, and I'll get some of the old fluid out that is coming from the caliper. That's the stuff that squeezes in and out of the caliper over time, and it just gets junky. So it's good to bleed from here. I'll pump the brakes once just to push a little bit of this fluid out, and I really only went down about halfway and then released very slowly to make sure I didn't suck any air back in. So that's probably enough. I'll go ahead and tighten it up, drain this fluid down into the bottle, and so then I've made sure that there's no air in the lines. I got a little bit of dirty fluid out, and not only took out a little bit, but you can see how dirty it is. And I can just clean this up with a little bit of brake cleaner and put the cap back on. So at this point, I'm done with the brakes on this side. I'll go ahead and get the wheel installed, and then I'll start on the driver's side. that, I got both of the front wheels done. Nothing too crazy to report on this side. The slide pin boot on this side wasn't that bad, but I went ahead and replaced it since I already had it. But nothing too bad over here, so I finally got the front brakes done. I also changed out the belt on this car. I'll link that video in the description. Next, I'm going to tackle the rear brakes, and then I've got a window issue that I'm going to fix as well. So that's it for this video. Stick around for the rear brakes and subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will catch you in the next video.
What is this thing?
It's a wing nut.
Wing nut?
What'd you call me?
Wing nut.